Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room hummed with the restless rhythm of men and women trying not to be nervous. Boots scuffed against concrete. A projector whined softly. Paper rustled, markers scratched across the map spread over the steel table. But when she walked in, spine straight, uniform sharp, shoulders squared, it was as if the entire atmosphere shifted. Heads turned. Conversations thinned. Eyes glanced her way, then quickly looked elsewhere like they were afraid of being caught acknowledging her. She sat down anyway. She had learned long ago that the silence of a room speaks louder than words. Silence was a language, and she understood it fluently. They didn't want her here. Not on this mission. Not in this room. Not in a war that demanded everything but gave nothing back. Her name was Captain Alara Ward, 34, a pilot first, then a sniper when the missions demanded, an operative because someone had to be. She wasn't the kind of soldier who spoke loudly or demanded attention, but her presence always seemed to tilt the air. Some men respected it, others resented it, most didn't know what to do with it. And tonight, as the briefing began, she felt the weight of all of it pressing against her like a second skin. The colonel, a broad man with silver at his temples and a voice sharpened by decades of command, tapped his finger against the map. His tone was flat, factual. Target compound, outer valley, elevation 9,000 feet, hostile presence confirmed. Intel says they're moving something important. We don't know what yet, but we know it matters. Eyes around the table narrowed, pens tapped, arms crossed, the same ritual before every mission. But Alara saw more than they did. She always did. The map wasn't just terrain to her. It was movement, choke points, possibilities, risks stitched together like threads of a story. She spoke, her voice even but clear. If they're moving it at night, the altitude cuts their options. Limited convoy routes, snowfields and rock, a few predictable passes, they'll have to use them. That's where we hit them. Silence. The colonel didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge the point. His finger kept moving along the markers, outlining the entry, the fallback routes, the time windows. He spoke like she hadn't spoken at all. Some of the younger soldiers shifted in their seats. One of them, a boy really no older than 22, glanced at her, then away, guilt flashing in his eyes like he knew what had just happened wasn't right. But no one said anything. She sat back, hands folded. She had learned this lesson a long time ago. In certain rooms, your voice will not carry. You can shout until your throat breaks, or you can say nothing and let time prove you right. The colonel ended the briefing with the same phrase he always used. Step off at 200. No mistakes. Chairs scraped, the squad rose, conversations picked up again, quick and clipped, papers folded, radios checked. The group began to thin out into the corridor. Alara stayed in her seat, staring at the valley etched in blue ink. Her finger traced one line, almost unconsciously, like she was following an old scar. Her throat tightened, though she hid it well. Because she knew this place. Not from maps, from memory. And she knew this mission wasn't what they thought it was. Captain Ward. She looked up, a voice near the door. Lieutenant Carter. He lingered there, one hand braced against the frame. Young, lean, the sharp edges of his face softened only by the uncertainty in his eyes. He was the kind of soldier who still believed in the possibility of things, believed that orders were given for good reasons, that missions had purpose, that every risk had meaning. She almost envied him. Your point about the choke points, he said. He should have listened. Her expression didn't change, but he didn't. Carter's mouth pulled into a faint smile. Maybe he will when it counts. Then he was gone. She sat alone for a moment longer, alone with the map, alone with the silence that had spoken louder than any voice, and with the knowledge that there was something about this mission no one else in the room understood. Something she hadn't told them, not yet. The base at night always felt restless. Generators hummed, radios crackled, Somewhere along the fence line, the dogs barked into the cold. The barracks were dimly lit, rows of bunks and lockers casting long shadows under the flickering bulbs. Soldiers packed their gear in silence, every movement practiced, methodical. The air was thick with tension, though no one admitted it out loud. Alara sat on the edge of her bunk, hands moving automatically as she checked her rifle, her sidearm, her spare mags. She packed, unpacked, and packed again. Habit was survival. Details meant life. But her hands lingered when they brushed against a small object at the bottom of her pack. She hesitated, then pulled it out. A photograph. The edges were frayed, colors fading, but the faces were still clear. Hers and his, both younger, both smiling back when smiles had felt natural instead of foreign. On the back, in handwriting that made her chest ache, were words she could never forget. Come back different, but come back. The problem was, she never did come back different. She came back broken. Piece by piece, mission by mission, and she had left those pieces scattered across deserts, mountains, valleys, across names carved into stone memorials and folded flags handed to mothers. This mission would be no different. She slipped the photo back into her pack, zipped it closed, and stood, shouldered her gear. Her reflection flickered in the metal locker door, eyes sharp, jaw tight, but tired in ways that no sleep could fix. Outside, the cold hit her immediately, biting through her uniform. The air tasted of fuel and dust. The thrum of helicopter rotors rolled over the compound, blades cutting through the night as the transport sat waiting on the pad, red lights glowing faint against the darkness. The squad was already moving toward it, packs heavy, rifles slung, faces grim. No one spoke much. There wasn't much left to say. She climbed aboard, found her seat near the edge, and strapped in. The metal floor vibrated under her boots as the engine surged. The bird lifted, the ground fell away, darkness swallowed them whole. Inside the roar, she closed her eyes, not to rest, not to dream, just to slow her breathing, to still the tremor inside her chest, to prepare herself for the weight she knew was coming. Because something about this mission pressed against her instincts, and her instincts had never lied to her. They weren't flying into just another op. They were flying into something else, something she couldn't name yet. But she could feel it. Hours later, they touched down on a barren ridge. Snow stretched out in every direction, bone-white under a sky littered with stars. The air was thin, sharp, like knives in the lungs. The silence pressed against them, broken only by the crunch of boots and the distant howl of wind through the peaks. She took point with Carter. His breath came in short plumes of vapor, eyes scanning the tree line. His hands shook a little, though he tried to hide it. She noticed. She noticed everything. "Not your first snow march, I take it," he muttered, trying to sound casual. "Not my first," she said. Her voice was steady, too steady. He looked at her like he was searching for something under that calm surface. "You don't talk much, do you?" She didn't answer. Words wasted energy. Energy wasted survival. Because her mind was already running the map in her head. Every ridge, every angle of fire, every possible place an enemy might wait. And that's when she felt it. The instinct. The warning. They moved into a narrow pass, snow muffling their steps. The moon slid behind clouds, leaving the valley in a dim, suffocating half-light. The squad tightened their formation, rifles raised. Then movement, just a flicker, a shadow shifting against the ridge. Her fist snapped up, the squad froze. She raised her rifle scope, cutting through the gloom, heart steady, breath low. But when she looked, nothing. Gone. Carter leaned closer, voice low. "What do you see?" Her lips barely moved, not sure. But she was sure. They weren't alone. The first shot came like thunder. Stone exploded near the point man. Shouts rang out. Soldiers dove for cover. Return fire lit the pass, muzzle flashes cracking in the dark like lightning. She hit the ground, rifle steady, eyes finding the glint of a scope high on the ridge. Exhale, squeeze, one down, shift. Another muzzle flash, exhale, squeeze, another dropped. Contact front, multiple, someone yelled. Rounds sparked off rock, hissed past ears. The squad fanned out, firing blindly into the ridgeline. The chaos was deafening. But as Alara moved, firing, reloading, firing again, a cold realization cut through her adrenaline. This wasn't random. The enemy wasn't scattered. Their formation was deliberate. Their fire was coordinated. It wasn't an ambush. It was a funnel. They had been led here. Her pulse hammered. She lifted her scope higher, scanning the ridgeline. And then she froze. There on the high ground, a figure not firing, not moving, watching. Her breath caught, because she knew that face. The man she had once spared. The man she had let walk away years ago, when her rifle had been steady, her finger ready, her orders clear. Now here he was, leading the ambush. And in that instant she understood. This mission wasn't just about a compound. It was about him. And someone in command had known. What did it mean, seeing his face again, here now in the frozen valley? Her breath clouded against the scope, her hands steady, but inside her chest something cracked. That man on the ridge wasn't just another enemy. He wasn't just a target. He was a ghost she had carried for years. A decision that had stalked her through every deployment, every sleepless night. She should have pulled the trigger back then. The world had told her to. The mission had demanded it. But she hadn't. She'd let him walk away. And now, because of that one act of defiance, 20 soldiers were trapped in a kill box. Ward, Carter's shout cut through the chaos. Where the hell are they hitting us from? She blinked hard, tearing her eye from the scope. High ridge, left flank, they've got us funneled. He relayed the call, his voice raw with panic. Grenades barked against rock, snow geysered into the air, men ducked low. The valley became thunder. Her rifle clapped again. Another muzzle flash silenced. She shifted, fired. Each shot deliberate, precise. But no matter how many she cut down, more rose in their place. The squad was pinned. Bullets hissed past her ear, sparking off stone. She pressed closer to the ground, cheek cold against the rifle stock. Sweat beaded despite the freezing air. Her body knew the truth before her mind did. If they stayed in the past, they would all die. Carter, she barked. He crawled beside her, face pale, breath ragged. They're not trying to kill us all at once, she said. They're drawing us deeper, hurting us. His eyes widened. Hurting us into what? She didn't answer, because she already knew. Minutes blurred. The firefight stretched on, gunfire echoing between the cliffs until it sounded endless. The squad shifted position, bounding from rock to rock, trading fire, trying to claw their way out. Every movement cost them. A shout, a scream, the thud of a body into snow. Alara moved like a machine. Cover, fire, reload, breathe. Her heart didn't race. Her body had learned long ago to run cool under fire. But her thoughts cut sharp, slicing past the chaos. This wasn't just another mission. This was personal. Because the man commanding the ridge, the man she had once spared, wasn't just anyone. He was Khalid Rahim. 7 years ago she had him in her scope. Same mountains, same snow. A raid on a different valley, back when she was still young enough to believe the rules mattered, when she still thought morality could survive on the battlefield. Her orders had been clear: take the shot, remove him. But she hadn't. She remembered the way his rifle slipped from his hands, the way his eyes, dark, defiant, but tired, had locked with hers through the glass of her scope. She remembered the voice in her head that whispered something dangerous. He looks like someone who's already lost enough. She had lowered her weapon. Let him walk. And now, 7 years later, that mercy had come back with teeth. Ward. Carter again, voice hoarse. She snapped back to the present. "We're cut off, rear blocked," he shouted. She turned. He was right. The narrow pass they had entered through was now crawling with more fighters, shadows moving between the snow-draped rocks. The squad was boxed in from both sides. Her stomach dropped. They had been swallowed whole. Gunfire roared. The squad's line frayed. A soldier to her left screamed, clutching his leg. Another fell and didn't move. The cold valley floor turned dark in patches. Ilara's jaw clenched. This wasn't just about survival. It was about what command hadn't told them. Because missions don't happen by accident. Command had known Rahim was here. And they had sent her anyway. They broke contact only because they had no choice. Grenade smoke filled the pass, curling through the snow, choking the sightlines. "Move," Carter shouted, voice raw, arm sweeping toward a side ravine. The squad scrambled, dragging the wounded, stumbling through the haze. Bullets ripped into the smoke behind them, sharp cracks in the night. Ilara covered their retreat, rifle steady, body moving on instinct. She picked targets, dropped them, shifted, never staying still long enough to be zeroed. The smoke gave them moments, not minutes, and she knew the enemy would be right behind them. The ravine swallowed them in blackness, narrow walls rising high. Breathless, they pressed against the stone, gasping, counting heads. 19 left. Silence fell heavy, except for the groans of the wounded. Carter leaned against the rock, chest heaving. His eyes found hers in the dark. "You knew, didn't you?" Her stomach tightened. Knew what? Who he was, that man on the ridge. The silence stretched. Snow fell like ash from the cliffs above. Finally she whispered, "Yes." The word landed heavier than any gunfire. Carter's jaw clenched. He didn't look at her again. The squad set up a perimeter, weapons angled at the ravine mouth, waiting for the inevitable push. Time passed slow, measured in heartbeats and shallow breaths. One of the wounded, a young corporal barely older than 20, whispered through gritted teeth, "We're not making it out, are we?" No one answered. But Ilara watched him. The way his hands shook, blood seeping through his pant leg, his eyes flickering like a candle in wind. She thought of her first wound, how she had prayed for someone to tell her she'd live, even if it was a lie. She crouched beside him, her voice low, even. "You'll see morning." He blinked at her, desperate to believe. His hand relaxed slightly. She knew the truth. He wouldn't see morning. But sometimes survival was measured in hope, not hours. The night dragged on. Snow thickened, falling in heavy sheets that blurred the world to white. The squad shifted restlessly, fingers stiff on triggers, ears straining for footsteps in the dark. Every sound, the crack of ice, the whisper of wind, felt like it carried death. Ilara sat apart, her rifle across her knees, her thoughts spiraling. Why hadn't command told them? Why send her of all people? Unless that was the point. Her hand trembled as it brushed the photograph in her pack. Come back different, but come back. What would he think now? If he knew she had let mercy reshape her fate and dragged 19 souls into hell with her? The cold bit harder. She tightened her jaw. Mercy had no place here, not anymore. The attack came just before dawn. Shadows moved in the snow, silent and fast. Then the first shot cracked and the ravine erupted in fire. "Contact front," someone screamed. Muzzle flashes lit the walls, brief bursts of orange against white. The squad returned fire, the ravine echoing like thunder. Bullets sparked off stone. Snow exploded into mist. The wounded cried out. Ilara moved low, crawling to a better angle, her rifle snapping like punctuation in the chaos. She dropped one, then another, her breath calm despite the storm. But through the chaos her eyes searched. For him. And she saw him again. Rahim. Standing back in the distance, just beyond the muzzle flashes, commanding, watching. His silhouette unmoving, framed by snow and smoke. Her finger tightened on the trigger. But something stopped her. Not mercy this time. It was the question burning inside her chest. Why hadn't he killed them yet? Because he could have. He had the numbers, the angles, they should already be gone. He wasn't just fighting them. He was sending her a message. And she had no idea what it was. The firefight raged, then ebbed, then raged again. Hours bled together. By the time the sun finally clawed over the peaks, the squad was down to 15. Cold, exhausted, bloodied, but alive. And Alara knew one thing with certainty. This wasn't about the compound anymore. It wasn't even about the squad. It was about unfinished business. Hers and his. And until that was settled, none of them were leaving this valley alive. She leaned her head back against the cold metal of the transport, eyes closed but mind racing. The hum of the engines was steady, almost comforting, but underneath it she could feel her pulse, fast, insistent, like it wanted to push out of her chest. She didn't let it show. She couldn't. Every soldier seated near her was watching in their own way, even if they pretended not to. Some with quiet curiosity, others with suspicion, a few with something harder to name. She didn't mind. She had lived her whole career inside those looks. But why was she so still now, when inside everything screamed to move, to run, to fight? Because she knew what they didn't. The coordinates they were flying toward weren't just dots on a map. They weren't just another checkpoint, another village, another suspected enemy site. For her, it was a memory buried deep, a scar she carried, invisible but never forgotten. A place where she had once lost something, someone, and where tonight she might have to face it all again. She kept her breathing even, forcing the rhythm to match the engine's drone. Calm, detached. She had trained herself to compartmentalize, to lock away the screams and smoke of the past. But some places didn't stay locked. Some places had a way of prying open doors she thought sealed. The lieutenant across from her shifted, his voice breaking the silence. "You ever flown into this sector before?" The question was casual, tossed like a stone into water. She opened her eyes slowly, letting him see the weight behind them. Once. That was all she gave. He wanted more, but the way she said it, clipped, final, told him not to ask. He looked away, chewing on whatever he thought she meant. And in the silence that followed, she drifted back to that night, the one she never spoke of, the mission no file held, the sound of rain on broken glass, the child's voice that cut off mid-cry. No, she forced it down. Not here, not yet. The pilot's voice crackled over comms. 10 minutes to drop. The hum inside her chest grew sharper. She ran her hands over her gear one by one, fingers checking what muscle memory already knew. Rifle, sidearm, blade, extra mags, locator. Each click, each touch calmed her, gave order to the chaos inside. It wasn't ritual. It was survival. The soldier next to her, a kid barely 20, was shaking his leg so hard the bench vibrated. She caught his eye. He froze, embarrassed. "You'll be fine," she said quietly. He nodded too fast, trying to believe her. But she remembered being him, young, shaking. Hopping someone older knew what the hell they were doing, and she remembered the bitter truth. Sometimes no one did. Sometimes you walked into hell and the only thing you carried out was silence. The transport hit turbulence, dropping them for a second before leveling. Everyone's hands clenched on the straps. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through, quick and thin. She didn't laugh. She looked at the floor, at the scuff marks worn into the metal, marks from boots like hers, marks from soldiers who never came back. 5 minutes. The pilot's voice again, this time sharper, clipped. She heard something under it, tension maybe, a detail others missed. Her gut tightened. The lieutenant noticed too. He leaned toward the radio, speaking low. "What's your read, Captain?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she listened, to the hum, to the pauses, to the way the pilot's breaths cut short before each phrase. Then she said, "Something off." He frowned, glanced at the men. "Keep that to yourself." She didn't reply. When the ramp lowered and the night air hit them, cold, damp, carrying the smell of soil and smoke, her heart stuttered. It was the same smell, the same air from years ago. She had told herself she'd never stand in it again, and yet here she was. They spilled out, boots hitting mud. The night swallowed them in shadows broken only by pale moonlight and the faint glow of distant fires. She lifted her rifle, scanning every sense alive. Her ears caught faint echoes, shouts. No, not shouts, something lower. Animal, wind through hollowed walls. Secure perimeter. The lieutenant's order spread them in a wide arc. She moved slower, methodical, eyes drawn toward a crumbled structure at the edge of the field, a skeleton of stone, and inside she swore she saw movement. Not enemy, not soldier, something else. She hesitated, then approached. Each step sunk into wet earth, loud in her own head. She raised her rifle, finger near the trigger. The shadows shifted. A pair of eyes glinted back at her. Not hostile, not trained, just terrified. A child. Her chest locked. The same height, the same wide eyes, the same small shoulders she had once reached for and never grasped again. The child froze, clutching something to their chest. A cloth doll, its face torn, its stuffing spilling. She lowered her rifle slowly. Her hands trembled just enough for her to notice. The lieutenant's voice called behind her, "Captain, you see something." She didn't answer, couldn't. Because in that single heartbeat, the mission wasn't about maps or coordinates anymore. It was about ghosts, about what she had lost, about what she couldn't bear to lose again. The child blinked, then darted back into the ruins, vanishing. She stood there, breath sharp, staring at the empty doorway. And in that silence, one truth hit her harder than any bullet. This mission wasn't just about survival. It was about redemption. But redemption never came easy. And she knew, whatever lay ahead, that child was only the beginning. Why did the air suddenly feel heavier? She adjusted her rifle, scanning the ruins where the child had disappeared. The moonlight carved edges on shattered walls, every shadow holding the weight of memory. Her squad spread out in formation, their boots squelching against mud, their radios whispering clipped commands. Yet for her, the silence between those sounds pressed harder than the noise itself. She wanted to move, chase after the child, but years of training anchored her in place. Impulse could kill. She knew that better than anyone, and yet her heart didn't care. It pounded like it had that night so long ago, the one no report mentioned, when she had stretched out her hand and failed to pull someone free. The lieutenant walked up beside her, his voice low but sharp. "You're drifting, Captain. What is it?" She shook her head. "Nothing." A lie. She hated how easily it slipped out, but what was she supposed to say? That a pair of frightened eyes just dragged her back into a memory she'd buried under years of silence. That she wasn't sure if she was still in the mission or stuck in the past. She could already hear the judgment in his silence. The squad pushed forward, weaving between the ruins. The wind carried faint echoes, metal creaking, a shutter flapping, distant dogs barking in broken rhythm. The kind of sounds that made soldiers tense, that hinted something wasn't right. And something wasn't right. She felt it in her chest before she saw it. The boy's doll, lying in the mud half-soaked, just outside a doorway. Her breath caught. She crouched, fingers brushing the wet fabric. The head was torn, one eye missing, but she could feel the warmth still clinging to it like it had only just been dropped. The lieutenant called again, "Captain." But she didn't answer, because she noticed something else. Boot prints. Not the small prints of a child, heavy ones, fresh, too fresh. The kind that didn't belong to them. She snapped her head up, eyes locking on the doorway. Shadows shifted, a glint of metal. "Down," she barked, diving sideways. The crack of gunfire ripped the night open. Bullets chewed into the wall where her head had been. The squad scattered, rifles raised, voices shouting. The world erupted into chaos. But inside the chaos she was calm, focused. Her rifle came up, her scope finding the source. A figure in black, half hidden behind rubble, muzzle flash betraying his spot. She squeezed. One shot. The figure collapsed. More fire erupted from different angles. Ambush. The kid with the shaky leg panicked, firing blind into the dark. She shouted his name, pulling him into cover before a round found him. His breathing came in gasps, eyes wide, until she grabbed his helmet and forced him to meet her gaze. "Breathe with me, now." He obeyed, shaky but steadying. "Good, now keep low, short bursts, not panic." He nodded, his hands still trembling but his eyes clearer. Another figure darted out. She fired, clipped him in the shoulder, enough to send him spinning back into shadows. Her squad returned fire, each burst carving flashes into the night. The lieutenant shouted coordinates, calling for suppressive arcs. But underneath the noise, she heard it again. The child's cry. Thin, sharp, terrified. Her chest twisted. The sound cut through gunfire, through shouts, through everything. She wanted to run toward it, but the fight tethered her here. Duty versus instinct. Orders versus something deeper. She gritted her teeth, laying down fire to cover her men, but her eyes kept pulling toward the ruins where the cry echoed. Because deep inside, she knew what it meant. They weren't just using this ground as cover. They were using the child. And the thought made her blood burn. The firefight slowed, the attackers retreating into shadows. The lieutenant ordered a sweep, his voice harsh. "Check every corner, clear it." She didn't wait. She moved fast, rifle tight against her shoulder, sliding into the doorway. The air inside was colder, carrying the smell of dust and old ash. Her boots crunched on broken tile. "Clear," one of her men whispered behind her. "Not yet." She pressed deeper. The hallway stretched into darkness, each step echoing like a heartbeat. She reached the end where a stairwell dropped into the ground. The cry came again, faint but real from below. Her throat tightened. She signaled 2 soldiers to follow, and they descended. The stairwell twisted, walls closing in. The flashlight beams cut across cracked stone, revealing old graffiti, rusted pipes, spiderwebs untouched for decades. And then fresh marks, scratches in the dust, scuff prints. Her grip tightened on the rifle. At the bottom, the hallway split, left or right. She froze, listening. One side carried silence, the other faint breathing, not the child's, heavy, measured. She motioned left, toward silence. The men hesitated, but they followed. And that's when she saw it. A shadow at the far end, broad shoulders, a weapon slung low. But he wasn't aiming, he was waiting. She raised her rifle, finger tightening. Then the child's cry came again, louder. From behind him. Her stomach turned. The man moved slightly, like he knew what she was realizing, like he wanted her to. A shield. They had turned the child into a shield. Her men tensed, ready to fire. She hissed no. Because she knew, one wrong move, and it wouldn't just be him who fell. The silence pressed heavier than the gunfire had. The man smirked, raising a finger to his lips, mocking her. And in that moment she felt it, the weight of her past colliding with the present. The night she had lost someone. The night she had promised never again. Her breath steadied, her hands stilled. Because this wasn't just a standoff, it was a reckoning. And she knew, whatever happened next, she couldn't afford to fail again. Why wasn't he pulling the trigger? That thought circled in her mind as she stared at the broad-shouldered man at the end of the hall. He had the advantage, darkness at his back, a weapon in his hands, a child behind him. Yet he didn't fire. He just stood there, breathing steady, lips curled into something between a smirk and a dare. Her squadmate to the left shifted his weight. The creak of his gear echoed too loudly. The man at the end of the hall tilted his head, almost amused. He wanted them jumpy, wanted them off balance. Her throat tightened. This wasn't random. She raised her rifle higher, steady, but her voice stayed low. Stay on me. Don't shoot unless I say. The soldier beside her whispered, but do not, her voice cut like steel. Because she knew, if they fired now, even one stray round would hit the child, and she couldn't live with that, not again. Her eyes locked on the figure. She studied the details others missed, the twitch of his right hand, the tension in his jaw, the way his boots weren't planted but angled like he was waiting to pivot. He wasn't a grunt. He was trained, experienced, which meant he was playing for time. The child whimpered and the sound sliced into her chest. A memory followed instantly. Rain, broken glass, a hand slipping from hers. The night that haunted her. No, she steadied her breath. Not here, not now. The man finally spoke, voice rough, accented. You don't belong here. The words echoed off stone. Her men stiffened. She didn't move. You think this is your war, he continued, louder now. This is our home, our children. You come with guns and you think you fight for justice. Her jaw clenched. She'd heard speeches like this before from men who twisted truth into armor, but something in his tone carried conviction, not performance, belief. And it made him more dangerous. Her squadmate shifted again, anxious. The man caught it, his smirk grew. Her voice, calm but cutting, broke the tension. Let the child go. Silence. For a moment it seemed like he might, but then his head shook slowly, almost mocking. You let go first. She read the angle. He wasn't asking for surrender. He wanted chaos. He wanted her to make a mistake. And beneath that she realized something else. The child wasn't just leverage. The child was bait. She whispered into comms, low enough only her men could hear. It's not just him. There are more, waiting. A pause, then a hushed curse from her squadmate. She adjusted her stance, shifting weight to her back foot. The man saw it, his eyes flickered. A small victory. Why stall? She asked, keeping her tone steady. His smile faltered. Because if you wanted us dead, we would be. So what are you waiting for? For the first time, his jaw tightened. Her suspicion hardened into certainty. He was waiting for a signal, for something to spring. Which meant every second they stood here was borrowed time. Her heartbeat thudded loud in her ears. She wanted to end it clean, one shot to his head, but the risk was too high. Too much could go wrong. Her squadmate whispered again, orders. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched the man, searching for any tell. Then she caught it. His left hand, not his right, tightening on the strap of his rifle. The faintest twitch of his eye toward the ceiling. And then she heard it. Above them, the faint scrape of boots. Her chest froze. They weren't waiting outside. They were already here. Above, she snapped, diving just as gunfire rained from hidden slits in the ceiling. Her squad hit the floor, bullets sparking against stone. One man cried out, hit in the shoulder. She dragged him back behind cover, her rifle barking in controlled bursts. The ambush had sprung and they were caught in its jaws. The man at the end of the hall vanished into shadows, dragging the child with him. Her stomach clenched. No, not again. She rose, firing at the ceiling slits, forcing the shooters back. Dust rained down, chunks of stone breaking loose. Her men returned fire, pushing hard. The narrow hall became chaos, flashes, smoke, echoes of shouts and screams. And in the middle of it, she had to make a choice. Stay and secure her squad, or chase the ghost of her past disappearing into the dark. The kid with shaky legs was crouched near her, face pale, hands gripping his rifle like it might slip away. She met his eyes. He was waiting for her call. Her throat burned. Orders demanded she hold. Her soul demanded she follow. And for once, she didn't hesitate. Lieutenant, you've got the squad. Hold this position, I'm going. The lieutenant's voice cracked back through gunfire. You step into that dark alone, you don't come back. She didn't answer. Because she knew she couldn't let history repeat itself. She sprinted into the shadows, rifle tight, every sense on fire. The sounds of battle dimmed behind her, replaced by the hollow echo of her boots in the tunnels. Her flashlight beam cut jagged arcs, chasing broken walls, dust clouds, and there. A smear of mud, small, fresh. The child's track. Her pulse hammered. She pushed harder, the tunnel narrowing, air colder, like it was swallowing her whole. At the far end she heard voices, 2 men, maybe 3, the child's muffled sob. She slowed, dropping her breathing low, steady. Steps softened. She became shadow just as she'd trained. Her rifle raised, scope catching the edge of movement. 3 figures, the child between them, a rough hand clamped over their mouth. She steadied her aim. But then her finger froze. Because the child's eyes, wide, terrified, were the same eyes she saw every night in memory, the same eyes she had failed once before. And if she fired now, one mistake, one twitch, she'd fail again. Her chest heaved, sweat stung her brow. The men laughed quietly, dragging the child deeper. And in that moment, a thought cut sharper than any bullet. Maybe this wasn't about killing. Maybe this was about proving to herself that she could still save. She lowered her rifle, hand sliding to the blade at her side. Silent, precise, personal. Because some battles weren't fought with bullets. They were fought with resolve. She exhaled slowly and stepped into the dark. Why did the darkness feel alive? Every step she took into that tunnel felt like trespassing in a grave. The walls pressed close, damp stone swallowing her breath, her boots barely whispering on the floor. Ahead, the faint shuffle of feet and the muffled whimper of the child carried through the stale air. Her rifle felt heavy now, too loud, too obvious. She shifted it against her chest, letting her hand drop to the blade at her side. Steel whispered from its sheath. Her pulse slowed, not from calm but from control. Every lesson drilled into her returned now in silence. How to move without being heard. How to blend with shadows. How to breathe like nothing human. She became the stillness, one with the tunnel. The men ahead laughed, low, cruel, careless. They thought they had time. They thought the squad outside had been pinned. They didn't know she had stepped away, trading orders for something deeper. One voice, rough and steady, carried clearer. The leader, the same man from the hallway. He barked something in a language she barely understood, but tone didn't need translation. Command, threat, warning. The child whimpered again, her jaw clenched so tight it hurt. She edged closer, pressing to the wall, every nerve on fire. The flashlight on her rifle remained dark. She trusted only the soft glow spilling from the men's lantern ahead. Flickers of light painted their silhouettes against stone. 3 of them, one armed with an old rifle, another with a pistol, the leader with a knife pressed too close to the child's throat. Her breath caught not fear, rage. She crouched, muscles coiled. If she waited, if she hesitated, they would vanish deeper into the maze. The chance would slip. The child's life would slip. Not again. She counted their rhythm, step, pause, step. Her body moved before her mind could argue. She lunged, blade flashing. The first man never even turned before steel slid across his throat. His gasp was wet, choked, cut short as he collapsed against stone. The others spun, shouts tearing through the tunnel. The leader shoved the child aside, knife swinging. She ducked, blade clashing against his, sparks flying in the dim light. The second man fired wild, bullet whining against rock. She twisted, ripping the pistol from his grip, driving her knee into his chest. He hit the wall hard, air leaving him in a grunt. Her blade finished it. The leader snarled, pressing forward. He was stronger, heavier, knife slashing close enough to graze her arm. Pain flared hot, but she didn't retreat. She stepped in, too close for him to use his size. Her forehead cracked against his nose. Bones snapped. He roared, swinging again, blind with blood. She caught his wrist, twisted, felt the knife slip from his hand. It clattered against stone. But he didn't break. He slammed her into the wall, shoulder crushing her ribs. Air burst from her lungs. For a second, stars filled her vision. His hands went to her throat, pressure crushing. Her fingers clawed at his grip, but he was relentless. Her lungs screamed, vision tunneling. And then behind him, the child. Small hands, a piece of stone clutched tight. They struck him across the skull, once, twice. He staggered, grip loosening. Her blade drove upward, straight into his chest. Silence. The man's eyes widened, shock flickering in them like a dying flame. He crumpled, breath rattling once before it stopped. She dropped to her knees, coughing, air tearing back into her lungs. Her throat burned raw, her ribs screamed, her arm throbbed from the cut. But she was alive, and so was the child. The child stood frozen, stone still clutched in trembling fingers, wide eyes locked on her. She lowered her blade, reaching out slowly. "It's over, you're safe." The child didn't move, didn't blink. She remembered that look, the same eyes she had failed before, the ones that had haunted every silence, every night. Her throat tightened. This time she had been fast enough. This time she hadn't failed. But it didn't feel like victory. Because she knew the look in the child's eyes wasn't gratitude. It was fear. Of her. She lowered her hand, pulled back. Her chest ached in ways her injuries couldn't explain. Behind her, distant gunfire echoed. The squad still fought. The mission wasn't over. She turned, forcing strength into her voice. "We need to move." The child hesitated, then took a step closer, clutching the torn doll they had somehow grabbed again. It was enough. She scooped the child into her arms, ignoring the flare of pain in her ribs. She moved quickly, retracing the tunnel, blade slick, rifle heavy, boots pressing into the silence left by the dead. When she emerged into the upper hall, smoke and dust choked the air. Her squad was holding, pinned but alive. The lieutenant saw her, eyes wide. "You're insane," he spat, firing a burst into the ceiling slit. She didn't argue. She just set the child behind cover, her voice sharp. "Stay down, don't move." The child nodded, still clutching the doll. She turned back, rifle raised, slipping into the fight. Her movements were precise now, colder, sharpened by what she had just survived. She wasn't fighting for orders anymore. She was fighting for proof that saving one still mattered. A grenade rolled across the floor. She kicked it back, seconds before it detonated in the far corner. Her men cheered, hope sparking in their voices. The lieutenant glanced at her, sweat streaking his dirt-caked face. "You went rogue." Her reply was flat but not apologetic, and it worked. Because deep inside she knew this wasn't about rogue or orders. This was about redemption. And redemption always came with blood. The gunfire slowed. The attackers withdrew, leaving silence and smoke. Her squad slumped, catching breath, tending wounds. One man bled heavily from his shoulder. Another's hands shook as he reloaded. They were alive, but only barely. The lieutenant crouched beside her, voice low, almost softer than she expected. "You saved the kid." She didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the child, sitting silent against the wall, doll clutched tight, face pale. "Saved, yes. But at what cost?" She knew the answer already. The cost was never measured in bodies alone. It was measured in silence, in the way the child's eyes would never forget tonight, in the way hers never had. She leaned back against the wall, exhaustion seeping into her bones. The mission wasn't over, not yet. But something had shifted. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't just haunted by the past. She was standing inside it, facing it. And the question that clawed at her chest wasn't whether she could survive this mission. It was whether she could live with herself after it. The world around her had narrowed into corridors of shadows and echoes. Every step Alina took felt as though it rang in eternity, bouncing off steel walls that had witnessed more secrets than the men who built them dared to admit. The base was alive, not in the way a machine hummed, but in the way a secret screamed beneath silence. She knew too much now. She carried within her the names of the forgotten, the truths sealed in locked drawers, the stories that the uniform stitched on men's backs had failed to hide. But knowledge wasn't armor, it was weight. And as the hours passed, Alina began to feel every ounce of it pressing down on her ribs, crushing the air out of her lungs. Still she pressed on. The night air above the compound was biting when she finally emerged through one of the hidden exit shafts. Stars blinked faintly, as though ashamed to shine over a place that thrived on deception. The watchtowers loomed behind her like silent judges, but she knew they hadn't seen her slip through. She had studied the rotations, mapped the blind spots, counted the seconds of distraction. That was what resistance looked like. It wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, meticulous, patient. Her boots crunched over frost-bitten earth as she descended the hill toward the tree line. She told herself the cold was a reminder she was still alive, but deep inside, a tremor grew that had nothing to do with the night's chill. She was afraid. Afraid because she knew she wasn't done yet. The files she had taken weren't just evidence. They were invitations to storms she hadn't yet faced. For every sealed folder she opened, there would be men willing to seal her lips forever. And still, she clutched the small satchel against her chest as if it were her heartbeat itself. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch snapped. Her breath caught. She dropped low, the soldier's shirt she wore blending into the darkness, and listened. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the faint whistle of the wind through pine needles. Then, a second snap. Closer. They were following. Alina moved, quick but careful, weaving between trees, her body remembering lessons drilled into her by men who never knew she would one day turn their training against them. Each step was a defiance, each breath a rebellion. But the chase had begun, and she knew running could only buy her time, not safety. By dawn, she reached the edge of a ravine, its icy river thrashing below like a serpent unchained. The sun had begun to bleed over the horizon, washing the world in pale gold, and for a moment she stopped. She looked down at the satchel in her hands, then out at the water's rage. A choice pressed against her. If she leapt, she might live or she might die. But if she stayed, capture was certain, and with it, the end of everything she had risked. The voices came before the figures. Orders barked, boots trampling soil, the hounds of silence chasing her down. She didn't think, she moved. The leap tore the breath from her chest. The cold water slammed into her like a wall of knives. She sank, the weight of the satchel threatening to drag her into the river's dark belly, but she fought, kicking, clawing, refusing. Because that was what she had been born into, refusal. She broke the surface, gasping, the current dragging her miles before it spat her out onto a rocky bank. She lay there, drenched and trembling, staring at the sky. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. Yet when she pressed her hands against her chest, she felt the satchel still there, soaked but intact. Her laugh was ragged, broken, almost a sob, but it was victory. It wasn't over. Hours later, Alina found herself inside an abandoned rail station, its windows shattered, its benches gathering dust like forgotten pews. She wrung water from her shirt, teeth chattering, and opened the satchel. Papers fanned out before her like fragile wings, their ink smudged but legible. She read names she didn't know, dates she couldn't forget, decisions that stained the hands of men who never bled for them. For the first time since she began this descent into silence, Alina felt the sting of tears. Not for herself, but for them. The unseen, the unheard, the ones erased because their stories didn't fit the uniform lines. She pressed her forehead against the pages. Her body shook, not just from cold, but from the enormity of what she carried. She had wanted survival, but now she understood. She wasn't just surviving for herself. She was carrying the weight of those who never got the chance. When she lifted her head, she wasn't the same girl who had slipped past guards or leapt into rivers. She was something else, something forged in silence and sharpened by truth. Her reflection in the cracked glass of the station window startled her. Her eyes were no longer only tired. They were burning. Outside, the distant rumble of trucks told her the chase hadn't ended. They were still coming. But this time, Alina didn't feel like prey. She gathered the files, tucked them close, and stood tall. Her legs wavered, but her will did not. She was ready for whatever came next. Because the truth wasn't a weapon you swung once. It was a fire you carried until the world either burned or was reborn. And Alina, cold, shivering, battered Alina, had decided she would not set it down. The dawn stretched higher, spilling light into the broken station, and in that fractured glow she whispered to herself, not as a prayer but as a vow. They will hear it, even if I never speak. The day had only begun, but part 7 was clear. It was not her breaking, it was her becoming. The world did not shatter the moment Alina chose to stand. It never does. Revolutions don't thunder overnight. They seep, they whisper, they ignite like embers that refuse to die. And Alina, drenched, battered, trembling, was just one ember. But the thing about embers, they carry fire in their bones. The trucks that hunted her rattled past the station, their headlights slicing through dawn's haze, searching for footprints she no longer left. She had vanished into shadow, cradling the satchel like a child cradles a promise. She wasn't running now. She was moving forward. The forest became her cathedral. Branches arched above her like vaulted ceilings, sunlight spilling through in thin golden spears. With each step, she felt less like prey and more like a messenger. She no longer asked herself why she hadn't given up, why she hadn't drowned in the river, why she hadn't burned the papers just to survive. The questions dissolved. The answer was her breath, her blood, her defiance. Alina found her way to a village nestled in the valley. Its roofs were crooked, its fences splintered, its people weathered by 1,000 storms. They looked at her with suspicion when she arrived, an outsider in a soldier's shirt, her hair tangled, her skin bruised. But suspicion broke the moment she opened the satchel. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. The villagers gathered around as she spread the documents across a wooden table in the center of the square. Old men leaned closer, their lips trembling as they read the names of sons who had never returned. Women gasped when they saw dates that matched the days their husbands had disappeared. Children clung to skirts, watching mothers weep over truths they had always feared but never confirmed. It was no longer just Alina's burden. It belonged to all of them now. For hours the square became a courtroom, not of vengeance but of reckoning. Farmers, carpenters, widows, they all bore witness. The silence Alina carried cracked open, spilling into voices that could no longer be contained. This cannot remain here," one man whispered, gripping her shoulder. His hand was rough, his voice shaking, but his eyes were alive. "They must all see, the world must know." And so the papers began to move. A tattered cart carried them to the next town. From there, smuggled copies found their way into hands of priests, teachers, even deserters from the very army that had tried to bury them. Truth had no uniform, no single voice. It spread in 1,000 disguises, carried by those who had lost too much to remain silent. Alina stayed hidden, always a step behind the trail of her own rebellion. She watched from doorways, from alleys, from train stations as people read the words she had saved with her breath and her blood. She saw faces break, then harden. She saw fear turn into something sharper, resolve. They never knew her name. And that was the point. Alina had become a ghost, a rumor whispered around firesides and in the back rooms of taverns. Some said she was a soldier betrayed by her own. Others swore she was the sister of a forgotten martyr. A few claimed she had drowned in the river, and it was her spirit that delivered the papers. The truth was simpler and more powerful. She was no legend, no saint, no weapon forged by gods. She was just a girl who chose not to let silence devour her. That was why her story spread faster than the files themselves. Because deep down, every person who heard it thought, if she could defy them, so can I. Months turned into seasons. The empire trembled, not from the weight of armies but from the erosion of lies. Whispers reached the high halls of power, whispers that grew louder, until the men in pressed uniforms could no longer drown them out with parades or speeches. They sent out edicts calling the documents forgeries. They broadcast denials, labeling her a traitor, a ghost, a fabrication of the enemy. But the people had already tasted truth, and truth once tasted cannot be untasted. Aliner's face never appeared on a poster, never flashed on a screen. Yet in markets and schools, in quiet kitchens and crowded trains, her presence was everywhere. A nameless defiance lived in every corner. And slowly, cracks spread across the walls of silence. Years later, when the empire finally fell, not in a single night but in a long collapse of rotting beams, people told stories of how it began. Some pointed to battles, some pointed to speeches, but in every telling, someone lowered their voice, leaned closer and said, "No, it began with her." The girl who never spoke, yet made the world listen. The girl who carried silence not as a cage, but as a weapon. The girl whose defiance was a poem written without ink or voice. Alina herself never saw the empire's end. That was never her aim. She disappeared into the fabric of history, her last sighting nothing more than a description scribbled in a stranger's diary. A woman in a worn soldier's shirt, walking along a field at dusk, carrying nothing but her shadow. But absence was not erasure. Her name may have vanished, but her story lived on, not in textbooks, not in monuments, but in the marrow of those who refused to bow again. And if you listen closely, if you stand in a square where truth once spilled, or by a river where a girl once leapt, you can almost hear her. Not in words, not in song, but in silence. A silence that isn't empty. A silence that demands. A silence that carries the weight of every voice that came after. The world did not remember Alina. The world became her.